Okay. Well, I am showing 6:02, and as we do have an official quorum, could we start the recording of this meeting?
I think Kate already did.
Oh, perfect. Oh, yes, it is. Recording is started. So we will officially call this meeting of the Westminster Inclusivity Board to order at 6:02. Welcome all. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope you're staying safe and feeding yourselves in a lot of inspirational and creative ways. I know we have a pretty dense agenda as far as some things go. I do want to give a little shout out, a couple of updates really quickly. One of our board members, Juliet, has resigned. So we will be moving, I believe, Cody, who is it Alan that's moving into the role of full member? So Alan, welcome. We're glad to have you. Although there's never been an instance where an alternative cannot speak or vote, because there's always, everyone has busy lives and everyone's networking. So we get that. I do know we'll have a few absences this evening. Piper will not be able to join us. Miguel is currently serving on the police advisory committee. That seems to happen during our meetings, which is fine. We'll circle with him after that. I do want to thank Alan. Alan had met with me some time ago and really talked about just kind of framing ideas around like just how we could do a better job of supporting people who are displaced from their homes, or populations who, for whatever reason are highly mobile and don't have a solid foundational sheltering or living space. We know that's affecting more and more people due to a number of factors. Alan, I know, has been very passionate. So in that spirit, we wanted to invite and welcome Kate Scarbeck, who's one of the coordinators who helped support this. Because I think what we had talked about, Alan, is we wanted to kind of talk, and I think several other people had indicated this as well, see what the city really is doing and seeing how we can support at the Inclusivity Board level, whether that's volunteering on the ground or some other opportunities for advocacy. So Kate, welcome. We are so glad to have you, and we will give the virtual floor to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this important topic tonight. I've got a few slides to share, so if you don't mind, I'm going to take a minute to make sure the slides actually load. Always a fun part of, even if it's in person, that's a fun part of waiting game, isn't it? So let me bring this up here. Okay, now the challenge is I'm not able to see anybody else. So are you able to see the slide at this time?
We are with you.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and proceed. I've already been introduced. I do work in Parks, Recreation, and Libraries, the department of the city. And I oversee the Homeless Navigator program, as well as work on our partnerships with around at last count, it was 100 plus partner agencies on homelessness. I'm going to very briefly cover how many people are experiencing homelessness, our best estimates that we have, what caused them to become homeless, and what is the city doing about homelessness. I welcome questions, but like I said, I can't see anybody with the presentation mode. So if you want to hold your questions to the last, or if you want to go on mic and interrupt and say, hey, I've got a question, let me know. Happy to do it either way.
And thank you. I think what we'll do, if we could, just for the ease of the presentation and so you can see who's talking, if people want to take notes or write things down as Kate's going through the presentation, and then once the presentation is officially done, Kate, we can kind of come back to camera and maybe pose some questions, if that's all right.
That sounds great to me if it works for everyone else. But absolutely, go on mic if for some reason the presentation disappears. I'm not going to know that. So it shouldn't happen, but if you don't make contingencies, it happens. So we have, at the last point in time count that was conducted earlier this year, in the last Monday in January 24th of 2022, there were 104 people who were surveyed in Westminster who were experiencing literal homelessness, meaning that they were living outdoors in vehicles or staying in shelters or in a hotel room paid for by an agency. We know it's an undercount because it's a national census that's done annually, and we are attempting to connect with everybody living in all of these different areas all across the 7-county Denver metro region in a 24-hour period. We know we miss people. We don't like that. We're aware of it. There's not a great way to compensate for that, unfortunately, although we keep planning and we get better every year at it. We do know from the United States Census Bureau, having conducted a household pulse survey throughout the better part of the last 3 years, since shortly after the onset of the pandemic, that we have up to 2,100 people potentially being evicted in the city as a result of not being able to make payments toward their rent or mortgage. We also have the Department of Education definition of homelessness, which includes all pre-K through grade 12 students who are literally homeless, meeting the definitions I mentioned above, living outdoors in shelters and vehicles, but also those who are staying in doubled and tripled up, where they're maybe staying with grandparents or cousins or family friends. They're not stably housed. The reason the Department of Education tracks that is that the students staying in those conditions, those types of living conditions, are overcrowded, and they frequently have exactly the same educational outcomes as the students who are actually living outdoors or staying in a shelter. So because of that, the Department of Education does track that type of homelessness. Now, I am relying here on the last data we had prior to the pandemic, because the school districts have all reported that they know that they lost contact with multiple students that were in precarious positions prior to the pandemic. And so the most recent data we have is coming out of the 2020-21 academic year. And that was the year that some schools still weren't in person at all. Some schools were only in person. Some classes had to go in and out to hybrid, just like we've had to do tonight. And so we know the school districts have lost contact with some of those students in that school year. So the most recent officially published data we have actually shows a steep decline in the students that were unstably housed. But from what I'm hearing from service providers, they're still seeing the same or even worsening situations for families, especially since the Child Tax Credit Act ended last December. So, and we know we've got a number of people fleeing domestic violence or about to flee domestic violence, and we don't know what that number looks like, except for I do have information from the clients who work with our homeless navigators. So I know that it's a pretty steep percentage of the people who are experiencing homelessness in Westminster have actually been fleeing domestic violence. So that said, those are the main categories of types of definitions of homelessness. And there's slightly different approaches to take with each, but each individual is different from every other individual. So the services have to be tailored to meet that individual's needs. The main cause of homelessness we hear across all regions of the country, and certainly here in the Denver metro area, is the imbalance between wages and housing costs actually creates homelessness. That's the primary cause of homelessness. And you can see on the screen the minimum wage in in the state of Colorado and the median per capita income in Westminster. If you're trying to own a home, you can't do it on minimum wage. You can't do it on the median and below. You have to be well above median in order to be able to afford home ownership. And the same is true of being able to pay for a market rate single bedroom apartment. Your minimum wages aren't going to do it. If you have two adults both working minimum wage, they have a chance of being able to qualify for a single bedroom apartment, but if not, they don't. So you have to work 80+ hours to be able to afford a single bedroom apartment. Now, we know the housing market's changing. We don't know exactly what direction that's going to go with the different mortgage rate hikes that we've been seeing and what that will look like. But this is the trend we've been seeing since at least 2015 in the Denver metro area, is this growing disparity between wages and housing costs. Back in 2017, the City of Westminster created an affordable and workforce housing strategic plan. I believe Molly Taylor presented to this board on that within the last few months. So I'm not going to delve into that in any great detail. That affordable and workforce housing strategic plan basically covered 30% of the area median income, households earning 30% of the area median income, which is around $75,000 and up, for affordable and workforce housing. It didn't cover those who earn less than 30% of the area median income, and those are generally the people who fall into one of those definitions of homelessness that I mentioned on a previous slide. So we have worked, as I've worked with both Adams County and Jefferson County on the steering committees to form their the county-wide plan to address homelessness. Each one of the two counties that Westminster sits within has slightly different plans, but there is, I'm happy to say, a lot of overlap. These are the basic goals of each particular plan. In Adams County, it's to prevent homelessness and strengthen the housing continuum. It's to expand services for people experiencing homelessness and increase data collection and sharing so that we can make better decisions as a county on what is really needed based on how the trends are changing, because we do see trends in homelessness change over the years. So we want to be able to respond to those changes as quickly as possible instead of not realizing until 5 years down the road, oh, we should have done this instead. Jefferson County, they want to optimize the housing crisis resolution system, which is the same basically as saying strengthen the housing continuum. You want to have housing that meets everyone's needs, including people who are currently experiencing homelessness. Ultimately, the solution to homelessness is housing. I've heard time and time again, homelessness is a wicked problem. It's difficult to solve. It is and it isn't. It has one common denominator. The solution to all homelessness is housing. And then you have to work on what are the surrounding issues that you might need to address as well. But getting people into housing is the most important thing to get them stabilized and then worry about and figure out exactly how to provide the supportive services that they might need. And to that end, Jefferson County also wants to increase the supportive housing units, meaning permanent supportive housing for those earning less than 30% of the area median income. And including case management provided in those housing units so that people who have been experiencing chronic homelessness have a much better chance of succeeding by stabilizing in a new living situation from what they've been used to, because people do get used to living outdoors, and in some instances they feel more comfortable living outdoors, and it can be fearful, a very fearful experience for them when they first walk into their apartment building when they haven't been in an apartment that's theirs, that they had a key to for 8+ years. Again, Jefferson County also wants to increase data collection and sharing across all the different service providers to make those best decisions. And they also want to increase community involvement. To that end, they've formed a Yes in My Backyard committee through Jefferson County Heading Home. And that organization works to advocate for more types of housing, especially that designed to meet the needs of those who need affordable housing, workforce housing, and certainly permanent supportive housing. At the same time, the City of Westminster, our council, creates a new plan, drafts a new strategic plan that's largely the same across years, but always modifies and adjusts throughout each year to better meet the needs of what we're hearing from the community. This year, homelessness appears in 3 different goals, 3 different objectives, all falling within strategic priority 2 of proactive public safety. Many of our housed community members don't feel safe around those who are experiencing homelessness. Some of that, a small part of that, much smaller part than is presumed, is warranted, but most of it is they're people just like the people who are housed. They just don't have walls surrounding them. So these are the four main goals that my staff and I were tasked with for being able to better address. Leveraging partnerships. As I mentioned, we do work with more than 100 different partner agencies across the Denver metro area, in large part to know which services to best connect the people that our navigators are working with. And then also identifying the best practices and policies, ideally addressing the source causes of homelessness. Like I said, the main source of homelessness, though, is stemming from financial disparity. So that's not an easy solution that 3 people can take on. That's something that we need to be looking at our policies across the city on housing, on what types of zoning laws we have, what is permitted, what's not permitted, when should it be permitted, when shouldn't it be permitted, under what circumstances. All of those things have to be considered. And then also asked to recommend temporary mechanisms and long-term permanent policy recommendations that can allow for the provision of services and resources. I'm going to very quickly cover a lot of work being done across a lot of different departments. These initiatives are not necessarily directly being overseen by me, being overseen by the navigators. In fact, they're spread out across multiple different departments. So we have built thousands of units of affordable and workforce housing over the last few decades. We are also working very hard right now, as I'm sure you heard from Molly Taylor, to preserve the affordable housing stock we have, because a lot of it would be aging out of being required to remain permanent. So offering incentives through community development block grant funds and local tax dollars and different partnerships that we can put together to help the landlords and property owners be able to continue to offer that below market rate housing at a high quality of life. Replace the windows, upgrade the boiler, all of those things that need to happen and can be a huge stretch if you're trying to keep your rents as low as possible so that you're not displacing people. Offering rental assistance, we've done that a lot through the last few years with the CARES Act funds, the home COVID dollars we've set aside a lot of that funding that was made available to us on a federal level to go to our nonprofit partners, including Maker Housing Partners and Foothills Regional Housing, both of our counties' respective housing authorities, and other nonprofit partners, where we've given them money to be able to distribute funds directly to the people who needed rental assistance because of reasons related to COVID. Even prior to the pandemic, we had joined a consortium with Adams County and Broomfield County to provide free landlord-tenant legal services through Colorado Legal Services to help deflate, sorry, I'm losing my voice here, to help deflate the number of people who are facing eviction and ensure that they have legal representation when it does get to an actual eviction process. We know from study after study that 90+% of people who have an attorney to represent them in court and during an eviction process do not wind up having an eviction placed on their record. That could be because the eviction process is stopped altogether, because a deal is worked out, or because the landlord agrees, hey, I'll take partial payment and we won't put this on your permanent record and prevent you from being able to get housing tomorrow. And by the way, if you have an eviction on your record, in Colorado, it takes 7 years to clear. So it can prevent you from getting housing for up to 7 years. So that's a really important prevention strategy. We also, and this was planned prior to the pandemic, but it so happened that we did it in 2020 anyway. Great timing there. So we brought on co-responders from Community Resource Center in our police department. These are actual clinicians with mental health professionals who go out not only to people who are experiencing homelessness, but also to the housed community members when when the police are called out to a scene that they believe they wouldn't be called out to if it weren't for some level of substance use or some level of mental health and behavioral health issues. So the co-responders are on scene to help figure out what's the resource that's actually needed, how can we de-escalate the situation, how can we meet this person's needs, how can we stabilize them, and what type of services do they need. Our co-responders meet with our homeless navigators now on a weekly basis to have case conferencing, because roughly 30% of the co-responders cases are in fact people who are experiencing literal homelessness. And so this is helping the navigators because they're not licensed clinicians. So the co-responders bring that expertise to the table, and the navigators bring the housing navigation and service navigation component to the table to better serve clients of both of them. As I mentioned, we work with more than 100 nonprofit partner agencies, faith-based community members, faith-based organizations, jurisdictions. I work with every jurisdiction in Adams County and Jefferson County, and every nonprofit working in the homeless sector, and many also working in the food insecurity sector as well, and other low-income initiatives. The navigators, I'm going to talk about a little bit more here in a minute. Next slide, I get to brag about their work a little bit because they're just fantastic people who are dedicated to ensuring that they're serving the people experiencing homelessness in Westminster. Through them, we also offer hotel stays. The city also has a wellness court that was implemented in, I'm losing track of time, but it was either late 2018 or early 2019. And that court is set up so that there is actually a wellness navigator, with our navigators and co-responders also work with. So when there is a situation before a judge that the judge is looking at it and realizes there's likely substance use involved, mental health issues involved, and perhaps homelessness, people are given the opportunity to seek treatment and to connect to resources as a way of fulfilling their repayment to society for whatever the crime is that they're brought before the court for. But instead of focusing on judicial punishment, they're focusing on social wellness. And then we've also developed camp protocols. The rangers, the police department, and the code enforcement officers have largely developed camp protocols to ensure that they're not moving people that the navigators are actively working with, that they are making sure that they have been given an opportunity to work with the navigators, and that they basically, we're trying to minimize the number of times somebody has to move, because we recognize it's not stabilizing to do so. However, on some sites, we've just had literally hundreds of calls complaining about a particular camp and particular behaviors being exhibited. And so we do have to, in that case, enforcement takes over and figures out what the next steps are. If it's on private property, we work with they work with the private property owner to figure out what the best steps are. But they do try to make sure that people have the opportunity to connect to some level of services. The navigator role, I think, is widely misunderstood. And in large part, that's because even though we had planned for the navigator, the homeless navigator, to start in Westminster at the beginning of 2020, and we'd gone through the recruitment, and we had already made an offer before all the shutdowns happened. So our first homeless navigator started 2 weeks after the shutdowns happened. So at that time, there was no place for the navigator to meet indoors with anybody because every place was shut down. If you think back to March of 2020, you could go into grocery stores for a set period of time as long as there weren't too many people in the grocery stores, but that's certainly not conducive to having a meeting with a client. Most offices were shut down, so there were just no indoor spaces to meet with people. So people thought that the navigator always met out in camps with people. That was never the intention. And the way it works is that they will do some level of street outreach to make connections, to get to know people a little bit, to invite them to work with them. But that's about 6% of their total time. The rest of the time is spent in actual client meetings, working toward getting people the next resource that they might need. A lot of people, understandably, have no longer have some level of identification. And so the navigators will work to get people to the DMV. They will pay for the replacement cost of whatever it is. We might need to get a birth certificate for them to be ordered through the state of their birth, usually Colorado, in order to be able to get them the type of photo ID that they might need, even to be able to access hotels. So they meet with the client, determine what the next need is that the client wants to see met, and ultimately really work to build a relationship, to refer them to the best partners for that particular person, that what's the best fit, which services might work best for this particular person. And ideally, ultimately, focuses on housing. We have been able, in the 2 years that the Navigator program has been fully operational, we have been able, and I say we, but I really shouldn't take credit for it, it's really the Navigators, have successfully gotten over 60 people housed. And in fact, I'm starting to lose track. I'm doing quarterly updates, but it's becoming routine enough that in a meeting I had with one of our navigators yesterday, I said, so I haven't heard you mention anybody having a move-in date recently. And she said, oh yeah, well, I've got 2 more people with move-in dates and somebody moved in last week. And I guess that's getting to be routine. So the good news is that they are getting people housed. The bad news is we have seen a rise in homelessness since the start of the pandemic. We were authorized by City Council to hire an additional homeless navigator in June of this year. And so that person came out of training about a month ago and has started taking on clients. Right now, each one of the navigators is actively working with roughly 25 clients, and they're in different phases of getting closer to housing. The navigators also will provide their clients with an opportunity to get into hotels, especially once they know if there's a particular medical condition that really is putting them at higher risk if they're staying outdoors. And also will place people in a hotel once they have a housing voucher so that they can better assist and not lose track of somebody and lose the connection with somebody who's staying outdoors while they're actively looking for housing, because that takes some doing. It's not easy to look for housing when you have a housing voucher, even though every landlord in the state of Colorado by state law is supposed to accept a housing voucher. Many find ways to decline. So that said, they focus on housing. What the navigator is not is enforcement or abatement or a complaint line for the housed community or crisis response. As I mentioned, we have 2 navigators and we're lucky to have those 2. And at the same time, those 2 can't respond to crisis situations 24/7. And really, there's sometimes they can't, even when they're working, they can't respond to a crisis situation because it would mean diminishing trust with the person who's sitting next to them at the table working toward getting the next service that they need. The navigators did find they were spending a lot of time getting people IDs, and so they have arranged for, on a bi-monthly basis, the DMV to come visit at the Irving Street Library every other month. And in fact, they had that operating 2 weeks ago and got people 35 IDs that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to get without taking each one individually to the DMV. Which would take up a lot of time for the navigators. So it's sparing the navigators, it's making it easier for the people experiencing homelessness. And at the same time, we're finding some of the house community members living in that area don't have ready access to cars. So getting to the DMV can be a challenge for them. So we're seeing housed community members come in and also make use of those services, and they're paying for their own. The navigators are working with Adams County Human Services to have ID vouchers provided for them. And that's just one example of some of the services that they're offering. We also offer a free shower program through our recreation centers. And so for the 2023 budget, what are we doing next, right? It's okay, it's great what we've done, and now what's next? So in order to meet council's strategic plan, the request we put into the budget was for a continuation of up to $25,000 for partnership contributions. That would allow us to easily chip in dollars that might be needed from if we decide if there's a need identified across either county that we need to be able to pivot and say, yes, we'll contribute to this. So we've got that in our back pocket if we need it. And if we don't, then we can use it on hotel stays. The hotel stays budget has soared. We walked into this year's budget with, I believe it was just over $50,000 and had we're in jeopardy of spending that out by the end of February. So we increased the request. We're not able to put everybody experiencing homelessness into a hotel because you actually need a shelter provider. If you have a hotel operating as a shelter, you need to have somebody there with 24/7 oversight, with trauma-informed care abilities, with recognition of what the special needs might be of some of the people experiencing homelessness, and trained in ways to de-escalate situations. And so we're not able to just simply place everybody in. And if we did, it would cost closer to $12 million over the course of the year. So we do partner with Adams County Severe Weather Activation Program. And we are able to get people into hotels on severe weather nights through that program. And if those counties, if the Adams County hotels are full at that time, we are able to usually arrange for another few of the clients that are working with the navigators to be able to get into the hotels. We have $105,000 for immediate needs and those vital documents I mentioned, because those are so pivotal to be able to get any level of services provided from any governmental agency or housing agency. And so this helps with some level of hygiene kits for the street outreach, although we've been very blessed and fortunate in a number of our faith-based community members have been willing to volunteer to create their own hygiene kits, and they donate those to the navigators to ensure that they've got that opportunity to get that connected. That helps us save money so we can spend on maybe a little bit costlier items, like some of the coats that are needed in cold weather stays, some of the tents that might be needed, sleeping bags, all of those things, and food. We often run across people who are experiencing immediate hunger, so let's make sure that they don't have that. Transportation costs. That has largely, whenever we give out bus passes, we make sure we're always giving enough for round trip. We're not sending people out of the city. We're sending them out of the city if that's where they need to connect to a particular service, and we're giving them the fare to get back here. As long as they want to return. If they wish to go somewhere else, they wish to go somewhere else. For the most part, people who are experiencing homelessness in Westminster grew up in Westminster, have worked in Westminster, have lived in Westminster as housed community members for decades. And they ran into a financial crisis somewhere along the line and wound up living outdoors. We also use transportation costs for those few instances that we have run across where somebody has moved here from out of state with wages that are for a new job that looks like so much money compared to what they were making somewhere else in the country. But then they get here and they find out what the housing costs are, and they realize they can't afford to stay here. They thought they'd be able to find a place to stay, and they just can't. And so if we know that the navigators will make sure that they do have a support system back home, we will, if they've run out of money while they're here, we will help with gas money. We will help them if they don't have a vehicle to find a way, whether it's bus, train, or plane, to get back to their support system. But like I said, the navigators always make certain that they do have strong connections wherever they're returning to, so that they're not just moving somewhere across the country to experience homelessness there. That doesn't help anybody in the long run. The Housing Stabilization Fund asked for and was granted this amount of money to help. We're going to be focusing largely on people without families, because the nonprofit agencies in Adams County and Jefferson County largely focus only on families with children. And that is great. That is absolutely needed. And there is no funding outside of COVID funds for anyone without rental assistance for people without children. So this is in the hope of helping with that. This is also with the intent of being able to use for first and last month move-in costs for the clients that work with the navigators, and for just basically ensuring that they're not going to be barred from being able to get into a new housing unit because they lack $200 in savings for their move-in costs. We want to make sure that that's an option for them. And we are planning on issuing a request for proposals or request for quote, I'm not sure which yet, to check in to see which nonprofit agency might be willing to operate that fund for us, because that's going to be slightly beyond the scope of what the navigators are going to have the ability to be able to spend in assisting the people that they're working with. Because there's going to be more paperwork required for that, basically. So the other, we've also been given $100,000 for assessment and planning, because when I did cost estimates for what it would cost to operate even only 11 units of a pallet shelter, which is similar to a safe outdoor camping space, the costs came in, including the shelter service provider that would be needed. For 11 pallet shelters, we would need $1.3 million annually, and those costs would only increase, and we'd only be able to help 11 people that way with $1.3 million. And it felt like that's maybe not the smartest way to spend that money, and maybe it is in the long run. So first quarter of 2023, assuming the budget passed, I should have given that caveat. It still has not fully passed City Council. It did pass 6-1 on the first hearing this Monday night, but that's intended to be able to identify what makes most sense for Westminster, what pieces, what's financially viable. And with that, I'm going to say we also have been authorized to have $1 million toward the Jefferson County Navigation Center, which is actually two different centers, one in Arvada and one in Lakewood. When we did the 2019 Jefferson County Comprehensive Homeless Count, we found that that is where the locus of the two centers of homelessness in Jefferson County are located, in those two cities. And those two cities also have HUD qualified census tracts, which means we are able to apply for low-income housing tax credit grant applications through the Colorado Housing Finance Authority, which would allow for 85 or more permanent supportive housing units to be built at the same site, at a site in Arvada and a site in Lakewood, with a day resource center and 50 shelter beds that the navigators would have access to be able to get clients into, especially when hotels are filled. And they wouldn't be the type of shelters that are operated in downtown Denver. They would have they would be more trauma informed. Not that the shelters in Denver don't attempt to be trauma informed, but they were built in the 1980s. And they are large barracks, basically. And a lot of people don't feel comfortable going there. So we want to make it so that it's comfortable for people to go to, but as a transitional shelter, so that people could be there for several nights, weeks, months, whatever it takes, and then transition into housing that they're working with the navigators to get into. With that, I am going to stop. I've just shared a lot of information. I'm going to stop the presenting mode so I can see your smiling faces again. I hope you're smiling. And ask if there are any questions. Justin, I can see your mouth moving, but I think you're on mute.
I'm muted, like I haven't done this before, right? I thought I clicked that. I just wanted to say thank you for the comprehensive overview of, you know, kind of what you and your staff are doing, and sort of looking at the challenges of, you know, people who are displaced or persons who are displaced. The other aspect, of course, is, I think you bring up an insightful point. I know Rich, Bev, a lot of people have really been creating a lot of advocacy around the idea that homelessness is directly linked to affordable housing or the lack thereof. So it is good to see that we're taking an official stance on that, even though we've known this by research for some time. So thank you for that. We'll open it up to questions. It looks like Alan has a question.
Well, first off, I have to say, I've known Kate off and on. We've been working along the homeless issue for, gosh, I think it's two and a half years now in Westminster. And I have to say, and I don't want to embarrass you, Kate, but you are one of the, to me, you're one of the most top, impressive, dedicated Westminster representatives that we have. I know there are many others like that, but I know you, and you're just an incredible human being as well. But I shouldn't have said but. I don't want to say but. We do have all these services, and I like the way that we are trying to approach it. But as anybody, including the Mayor Pro Tem, has heard me speak before council about my concerns. So just let me say this: in the 2.5 years that I have been doing outreach in the city, as well as unincorporated Adams County, which the areas that border the city, I still see dozens of people that are still on the street that I saw 2.5 years ago. That we have an incredible number of safety nets, but they're really not all connected the way I see it. A lot of people are falling through. If we are still having these people out on the streets. Today, I encountered someone who was right on the border of the city. She moved from unincorporated Adams County. She had probably moved over the last 2 or so years. She moved, that I can recall, about 6 times. Just 2 weeks ago, she moved into the city. And today, she tells me that police and park ranger came by to say, well, you have 7 days to move. She just moved everything here. This is not an easy spot to find. You have to know the area. And I was wondering, well, why are you making her move? But I'm sure it's always going to be a health reason, a safety reason. That's what we usually hear. One of the issues that I do have, and Kate, tell me, does this, or maybe Mayor Pro Tem knows this, the $1 million that the city is giving to Jefferson County for Arvada and Lakewood, is that federal money?
No, those are local tax dollars.
Okay.
Could I ask real quick, Alan? I don't
Yes.
mean to interrupt, but you said for those other cities, you realize that is also to help people that are experiencing homelessness in Westminster, but you have to, it's a regional approach and it has to go somewhere.
And I wanted that somewhere to be Westminster. Because again, when I go back there 2.5 years, I'm still seeing the same people over and over again who are still unhoused for whatever reason that it is. I'm still seeing the same people.
I have no doubt that that's true. And as Mayor Pro Tem said, it is a regional approach. We don't think that that's the final answer in Jefferson County of 2 sites ultimately. However, by addressing the 2 sites that have the most people experiencing homelessness, and the point in time continues to show, the homeless management information software continues to show that the bulk of homelessness, 70% of homelessness in Jefferson County, is occurring in Arvada and Lakewood. And yes, we have it happening here in Westminster as well, but we have $1 million to contribute to 2 $65 million projects. I want to understand that those are pretty costly projects. So the fact that our navigator through through the MOU that we have with the county and all the other jurisdictions within the county, will be able to directly access services there for their clients.
And if you don't mind, because I know Alan, you have brought this up on Monday, and obviously sometimes depending on public comment and stuff, we don't really get to have a dialogue. So I get the rare opportunity that I get to speak on something that you came and spoke to, you know, for the benefit of more folks. One of the things that is important in my mind when I made that decision, and I mean, you could talk to the other council members with theirs, but when this was presented to us by Kate, I think Jefferson County's model hopefully gets brought on by other areas, because it's not about breaking the cycle the way that they're going to approach it. And so our $1 million, like maybe that would last us, you know, a year. I mean, this stuff gets really costly, but putting that money together, instead of just saying doing hotel vouchers or things like that, having a place that doesn't exist today in the region where we could have beds that also has resources to get people out of the cycle is what I really like about it. The way I understood anyway, and Kate knows it better than I do, the way that center is going to be situated is it's going to have a lot of resources. And I think that those kind of dollars spent are better. Like this isn't homelessness necessarily, but breaks the same cycle. The affordable housing that they have down by the TOD has some of those same kind of things in their main lobby, where they have resources for folks in order to empower them so that they're not in the cycle. And you know, when different people I've heard about, such as the one you're talking about, you know, I don't know everybody's situation. Some folks, unfortunately, they also have to be willing to take the help, and that doesn't mean that we, you know, just cast them out by any means, but we have a couple hurdles that we have to get by. One is having the resources available, two, getting people to take them. But just to me, being able to put $1 million towards something that actually is going to have those resources versus just beds, I think that's money better spent in my mind. And that's kind of the way that it was presented to us. And so I know I don't think Adams County is quite as advanced, if I remember correct, in the way that they're approaching it. But I certainly hope that the Jefferson County is successful enough that other areas in the region take it on. Because I mean, you're right. I mean, homeless folks don't seem the boundaries of the cities. And, you know, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's such an important thing to do a regional approach, because I don't think, at least my intent isn't to, you know, chase them back and forth over the border, because ultimately, if you don't have solutions, that's what we're going to do. And I mean, that's what we've seen in the metro area over the last handful of years. Denver comes up with a camping ban, they move from Denver. Arvada tries to do something, they move from Arvada. You know, and I for one certainly like the approach that the region has taken, and I know Kate's done a lot of work on it. So, and I don't mean to, you know, take up this much time, but I think it's important to be able to at least understand perspective. And I think the majority of council kind of would feel similar. They may have some different caveats to it, but in the discussions that we've had.
Let me comment on one of the things that you said about willing to take. I hear that, I've heard that from other counselors as well, and other citizens, that people need, you know, we're offering this, but they need to accept it. You have talked, Mayor Pro Tem, about, you know, mental illnesses, mental challenges, and that's what we do see out there quite a bit. People who are afraid of the system. We've had 2 women that have been pregnant. One of them went all the way through the entire pregnancy, never going to see a doctor. She told me she was herself a fetal alcohol syndrome baby, and she does meth. She did cut down on her meth during her pregnancy, but the whole time. So what it is, it's like, yes, there are services available. One of the navigators that I worked closely with during that time, Ash, even tried to get her to go to visit a doctor. I think even asking, should we bring in a co-responder team? This woman has a fear of going to, I mean, there's a fear of authority. There is a fear of government, in this case, the hospital, the administrations. So she would not go. And this is one of those tragic things. From what I understand, the baby seems to be healthy, but that's it. And that's just one. I just heard another woman is 7 months pregnant, and I don't know what I haven't met her yet. So a lot of times people seem to categorically say, we have the services, they're not taking them, they're not accepting them. And that I really take strong issue with that approach, that just because you have it doesn't mean, if we build it, they will come. It doesn't happen that way. So it's a slow process of building trust.
And Alan, thank you. I think there could be some implication about maybe how we as members of the Inclusivity Board can help get that message out. So more on that in a moment. Rich, I see you have your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. Hi, Kate. I'm glad you're in the position you're in. Although I suspect it's thankless sometimes. One of the things I noticed in some of the statistics that you listed, and I realize they're probably very much incomplete, is that the kind of homelessness that we are talking about, here in the last few minutes, is that part that's visible, which is the tip of the iceberg. And when you look at the students whose families are experiencing homelessness, that suggests that there's a huge amount that we don't see that is possibly more of a cause of mental stress than a result of mental stress. So I'm really glad you're doing this, and it wasn't very long ago that we had nothing. And I'm glad to see you in that position. So this might be a sensitive question, and maybe you don't want to ask it. Maybe someone else should or answer it. I mean, is the political will to carry on? I was pleased to hear that 6 out of 7 councilors at least voted for the first in the first go round. So that was a question that was in my head that suggests that there's some support there. Can you address some of what's happening for those folks that are sort of below, the iceberg below the surface that we don't see?
Yes, to a certain extent, I can address it, not very quickly, so I'm going to summarize it very high level. There are very different stories about how people are becoming displaced and what the concern is. Like I mentioned, there is funding, never enough funding available for the families with children, but there is funding through the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Fund. That's how most all of the nonprofit service agencies serve those families with children. When a school district's homeless liaison reaches out to our navigators, it's because they've tried everything they can think of at that point. And I know Alan, I believe, just recently referred a family to one of our navigators, and she's working with several different agencies to see what's the best next steps, because they're actually connected to services in Denver. But that doesn't mean we want to see them harmed here in Westminster or in Adams County. So trying to make sure that they're connecting to the best services that have capacity. And that's the challenge, is finding service providers with capacity. That's always a challenge. So the navigators will kind of reach in to serve as advocates for those cases, but they can't, they don't have the capacity to be as involved. The city tends to receive the calls for the more visible homeless, and the rest are a little bit more out of sight, out of mind. And what worries me about that is that the only predictive factor of who's going to become homeless as an adult is if they met any definition of homelessness as a child. And you look at those numbers, and that's terrifying for 10 to 15 years from now, even 5 years from now. So the school districts are doing what they can. The nonprofit service providers are doing what they can. As I also mentioned, there is zero funding available for families for people without children. And so that's why I'm looking at, okay, local tax dollars need to go to that and be funded through and funneled through a nonprofit service provider willing to take that portion of the population on. Because it's not funny when somebody becomes homeless for the first time at 76. It's not funny when anybody becomes homeless, but a 76-year-old, it doesn't end well, and it ends very quickly. So a lot of what we've been doing is focusing on what are the system gaps. And there's not enough services, period. There's not enough funding, period. So it's how can we use our resources as wisely as possible and figure out who is willing to accept services today. Because I think that's the key portion of what Alan was sharing, is that I don't look at it as somebody is turned down. If somebody says no, they don't want services today, that doesn't mean they're going to turn it down tomorrow or next week or next month. Our navigators have to have radical hope that these people will have a day where they will accept that there's a possibility for change. So, and there has been a lot of talk at the federal level about how to better support prevention of evictions for financial reasons. We saw the effect the pandemic had, but the fact is, in Colorado, especially in Adams County, we were one of the highest evicting counties in the nation prior to the pandemic. That is a massive problem that has to be addressed, and we have to find ways to keep people able to afford to live where they want to live. Otherwise, they will continue to live where they want to live, but it's not where any of their house neighbors want them to continue to live. So it's finding that balance between community members more than anything else.
Thank you. Rich, did you have anything else you wanted to add? And then we'll come back to Alan.
Yes, I very much agree with Councilor DeMott's comment about being a regional issue and being addressed regionally. My studios are in Lakewood, in the Colfax, well, about a block and a half from Colfax Avenue, and I can attest that it's much more intense there. And it seems like the farther south you go from here, the more obvious it is. But again, that's the tip of the iceberg. Those are visible, and the true problem runs much deeper than that. And it comes back to the solution to being without a home is attaining a home, and what kind of policy approaches can we take to make it possible for people to afford a place to live here in our community. So thank you again, Kate.
And also to challenge some of the predatory practices of some people who would seek to displace people for the sake of profit. So that's another piece together as well. So Kate, before I get back to Alan, I do want to ask a question. What supports, what things can we do as residents of the community? What advocacy can we really, strive to help support your work and your cause? What are some things that you see as a need that maybe we can't, if we could wave a wand and give you another $1 million, we certainly would. That being said, what can we do? Yeah, 10. Well, sky's the limit, right? If we had that magic. But what could we do in the interim to ensure that we are not just knowing about the problem and not being a part of the solution? And I think that's where some of the frustration that I've heard in talking to several of my fellow Inclusivity members and talking to people from the community is, great, what can we do?
Yes. So contribute to your favorite nonprofit that works on housing stability. make financial contributions to those organizations that are helping, particularly in Westminster, and those are most of the organizations working in Adams County. And in Jefferson County. So the Family Tree, the Action Center, Growing Home, Access Housing, Almost Home, Family Promise of Denver. Helping with those types of financial contributions can be a godsend to those nonprofits, because they are wily. They are small but mighty, and they always need more, and local contributions can be used very flexibly, whereas federal dollars, not very flexible, gotta say. There's only certain criteria that you've got to meet to be able to get those federal dollars. So the more local funds we can have, the better. Non-financial ways to contribute. When you see posts on social media about people assuming about what the backstory is with this person or that person, share that, hey, it costs a lot to live in this area. And if you're a custodian, if you're a nurse, there's a lot of great information on the economic development housing website for the city of Westminster. All the different professions, nurses, police officers, fire personnel, librarians, they all qualify for affordable housing. Teachers, they're people we want in our communities. We need those professions in our communities. But if we don't have a place for them to be able to afford to stay, they will move out of the area, and the community will be lesser for it. So those are quick ways to look at contributing, kind of having that dialogue with the housed neighbor who's really offended to see somebody that doesn't look like them in a nearby area. That's can be a hard conversation to have, but I think you were all appointed to the board because you have that ability to navigate those types of conversations too. Looking for opportunities to volunteer. In the next few weeks, we'll be posting for volunteers to participate in the Point in Time, to go out and conduct surveys of people experiencing homelessness. There's going to be that count is an annual count. It keeps rolling around every year, and the better we do at it, then the more funding comes into the COC, the Continuum of Care, which is the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative for the 7-county region. The better we do on the methodology of the Point in Time, the more funding we receive. Right now, the 7 counties are receiving, outside of COVID funds, $28 million to distribute to address homelessness across the entire region. There is no way that's enough. Not if 11 pallet shelters, operating an 11 pallet shelter site costs $1.3 million. We can't rely only on federal funds. So have those conversations that we need local dollars, we need foundation dollars. If you see a grant opportunity, send it my way. I may not be the one to apply for it. I may ask one of our nonprofits, this seems like it's a better fit for you. Would you be willing to? I can help you get letters of support. I do that all the time with the nonprofits to make sure that our communities are getting as much funding coming in to assist with this, because I wish I could say that a housing crisis can be solved without funding, and it just can't.
Understood. Thank you, Kate. We'll go Alan and then Seth, and then final thoughts.
Thank you. Speaking of thoughts, I have a lot of the people consistently ask, because a lot of times when the weather is unkind, whether it was the heat of the summer that we had or in the winter, people sometimes cannot get into the hotels or motels. I'm not sure whether the city already has any contracts. I don't know if the city competes with like Adams County or Jefferson County, or if you work together, but there are those people who are still looking for a safe outdoor space or safe parking. The only parking that I knew of that Adams County had, one is in Reunion, which is by the airport. The other is somewhere else in Commerce City. But there are actually people who are working part-time or full-time. They can't go out there when their job is, I have one guy today told me, well, he works down at Denver Tech, so he drives. He was in the Walmart parking lot. Walmart said you have to move. So he's in another area, living out of his car, full-time job. He's not going to get in because, as he told me, he still has, from when he was a teenager, a sex offender. So he's registered that way. It keeps him from being able to go to certain places just because of that. He has all his IDs, he has a vehicle, but he's living in it. I want the city, I would love to have the city have a safe outdoor space. The St. Francis Center, I visited there with three different members of our legislature, our Colorado legislature. And I was told by the man who operates it, Ian Stitt, that it cost about $100,000 to set up. And I think that was, I always think it's like 65 people, but maybe I'm way off on that. Maybe my number, maybe it was, but it was a great setup, low barrier, but not no barrier. And it did cost, for that number of people, about $1 million per year. I think the money can be there. What I would like to be able to ask Kate is, if you could have the perfect setup here in Westminster, what would it be?
Well, the perfect setup in Westminster would involve nobody living outdoors, period, including in vehicles. I want an end to homelessness. That looks a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. There's no one solution that works for everyone. The safe parking spaces that you mentioned, great opportunity. Our council has said that they are willing to allow any of our faith-based partners to operate such a lot. They are typically in faith-based lots. Meals are often provided by the members of the congregation. No church has stepped forward with that offer. The same with non-congregate sheltering, which could also work. But if we don't have faith-based partners willing to do that, then yes, do I need to go back to council and say, okay, well, we probably need to look for government-owned land, or finding a property that we can take and purchase and making it possible. But then how do you get the services there? So for that type of operation, safe parking spaces cost a lot less to operate. Denver, in their 2023 budget, is planning on $600,000 for their safe parking programs that'll be operating in different faith-based lots. And yes, but is it ideal that somebody's living in a vehicle? No, it's not. So we have to have some level of case management to connect people to housing, to be able to get them out of living in their vehicle as quickly as possible. So my answer, Ellen, I'm sorry, I don't have a short one, but there's a lot of different things that are needed. And it includes the full spectrum of housing, and it includes multiple sectors of the economy, including faith-based partners, including the business community, including nonprofit partners, including governments, all coming together and working towards solutions. It can't be a single government working alone. It can't be a single nonprofit working alone, or a single church working alone. That has been tried and failed repeatedly. So I'm going to end with that.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Alan, for that thoughtful conversation. I think prompts some of my thinking to maybe do some follow-up conversation between you and I too. All right, so Seth, thank you for your patience.
Sure. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned, setting up a yes in my backyard kind of thing. Are there any general or specific areas where you need people saying yes in my backyard, and in particular, are there like attitudes that would be helpful for everyone, helpful for people like the Inclusivity Board to be promoting about, our neighbors and things like that, that would help with the thing at a broad scale, with this issue at a broad scale.
Yes, if you like, I could put you in contact with the YIMBY work group of Jefferson County Heading Home. You're not restricted to having to live on the Jefferson County side of the city to participate in that, but they are putting together toolkits to help with that. And it's needed not just in Westminster, it's needed throughout every county in the Denver metro region. When it comes up for a public hearing of, will we allow denser population in the suburbs? We all know the suburbs were formed on the premise that single family homes were the way to live. And we're watching it not become sustainable for a sizable portion of our community members. So we probably as a nation, because it's not just here, in 2017, we hit a tipping point in this nation where more people living below the federal poverty lines were living in the suburbs than were living in urban areas. We've got poverty here in a way it was never imagined. And we have to find ways to address it, and sooner rather than later. So with that in mind, if you're interested, I can certainly put you in contact with the chair of the Jefferson County Heading Home YIMBY group. Like I said, yes, in my backyard, because they pay attention to when those things are coming up. They will respond. They have ways of responding on social media that engage community members instead of shutting down conversation, because that's not good either. We have to have an ongoing dialogue about reimagining what the United States suburbs looks like 10 to 20 years from now.
I think that would be valuable to have, not just connect us individually, but like, I think that would be valuable for our board to be in contact with the YIMBY group. So yes,
agreed.
If you could put us in contact,
please.
that would be great.
Okay.
Yep, agreed. Thank you. Thank you, Seth. Kate, thank you so very much for your advocacy and your passion and just clear, capacity for this hard work. We cannot tell you how much we appreciate you. We will help in any way we can. We will do what we can to network, hold events, outreach, go knocking on church doors if we need to talk about maybe the possibilities for those that may not know that that's an option, or that to be clear that that is, to see if we can get some headway, at least to get some safe grounds for some of our persons who are dealing with homelessness right now. So thank you again. We appreciate your time. Thanks for being the bulk of our meeting this evening, but I think it's well needed and timely, as for many people of different faith-based or cultural values. We're going into a holiday season. So I know that becomes even more critical and harder as the weather gets colder and demands for socioeconomic, challenges grow higher. So again, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, and I wish you well on the rest of your meeting. I did not intend to take up this amount of time of it, so thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time. We really appreciate that.
Thanks.
So thanks, Kate. All right, friends. I do definitely feel like there's some follow-up conversation to this. I imagine that, like many of you, I'm processing some information. So, there's great work that's happening at that level with the city. There's obviously a lot more work that needs to be done that no one person can do alone. So I think, there are just some implications there we'll talk about a little bit more, but we'll move on through the agenda at least as much as we can. We do have under old business approval for previous meeting minutes. So do we have a motion to approve the September meeting minutes for our IB?
So move.
All right, it has been moved. Is there a second? Okay, Alan, I see you seconding visually. So it's been motioned and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, Hearing no movement for discussion, all in favor of adopting the meeting minutes from September? You can raise your hands in the little thing if you need to. Okay, I see hands raising. Good. Is there any opposition? And please unmute if you can and speak, or chat if you need to. Okay, seeing no opposition, so moved. Thank you. I know it's a little bit cumbersome to get, motions carried in virtual format. Mayor Pro Tem DeMott, thank you for your patience and hanging out. I know we switched things around just so Kate would have some time, so we appreciate your flexibility. Is there anything that you feel would be good for us to know?
Sure. So Kate mentioned that we did pass 6-1 the first reading of our budget for the next year. So I don't have any reason to believe that won't pass second reading. This last week was Jody Andrews' last meeting at the helm of interim city manager. So we did recognize him with a proclamation and kind of a little bonus from city council, which was quite a feat with a publicly noticed meeting for us to be able to do that and him not be surprised. So our mayor is very crafty and she figured it out. So I think he was pretty surprised. So and then the other big thing that we did was we did a water rate increase. And so you can see what that increase is. Hopefully in the short future, because I know this group's been pretty interested in the water, that you'll be seeing, well, council will also be seeing what options that we have that they're going to present. I know staff has been working really hard. We've had multiple different meetings going back and forth about what the future water plant plan will be. But this was a piece of that. Staff worked really hard to come up with a financial plan that gets us 10 years ahead towards that goal, and having the right amount of money to build or a replacement or a redoing Semper, depending on which option we pick once we see them. So that's really important work, and we're, I think, all very grateful for all the work that they put into that. And we're one step closer. And then I guess the other big thing is, if you guys are free on the 24th, you could come meet the new city manager. That'll be his first meeting. I'm sure a lot of you got to meet him when he came out and interviewed through the process. I know I saw a handful of you at some of those different meetings, but we're excited to, kind of get that behind us and get moving forward so we can hire a new chief. There's some other key positions such as utility head that still have interim people in those positions. So I think planning also has, right? Planning still has an interim in charge of it. But, some of those things that you would get to a point where, you're going to have a new head of the organization, that we're just trying to keep things moving forward and move us to getting Mark on board. So we also, council will have a retreat with him the last Saturday of the month, I believe. Cody would definitely know because she's the one who has to herd cat, so to speak, with council.
Yes. And check your email because I sent you one this morning of an activity you need to do in advance. Yes. And also HR director is in process too.
Oh, yep. I'm one they always have to start texting because I have 4 emails I have to watch between work here and everything. So, but lots of good stuff, I think, moving things along. Been a lot of stuff in the community going on. I think it's a fascinating discussion around homelessness. I think it's multifaceted issues, and my brain is the mayor's and we both come up with lots of ideas when we listen to these conversations. What could the city do to even just connect people that maybe have income if they knew of a room that was available? That to me, those are some of the areas where maybe this group could think through some of that, and maybe the city could partner in screening people to make them more comfortable to be able to rent out rooms or something like that. So I mean, it's going to be an all hands kind of thing if you really want to get past that. And I think to some of the points I've heard, I certainly have a personal connection to it with the mental health stuff with my daughter. It's it's challenging, and the state is strapped, and we don't have resources from services to housing. So just such a wide variety of issues that impact that. So, but as always, I appreciate all the work that you guys do. I am, just so you know, with the boards that I liaison to, I'm really trying to see if we can't get you guys in with us so that we can kind of try to align and make sure that we're, finding some things that we can partner with and make sure that we're empowering you guys and tooling you to, get some wins under your belt, so to speak. So I'm looking to staff to see when we could do that. The other thing that I've asked council and recommended is, I think when we go into strategic planning in the future, that it would really make sense for us to have time with our boards, specifically like you guys and the EAB, so that you could get some of the benefit from our facilitators that we get, and and we can have shared goals that that we can support each other on. So I haven't totally got 100% buy-in on that yet, because I just recently brought it up, but just so you guys are aware, I think that that's something that makes a lot of sense to me, just being on council for 5 years and seeing some of you groups that have done your best to do some of your own facilitation, kind of had a light bulb moment in the last month, like, why don't we just have them be part of our thing? Because I know Cody likes to plan it as complicated as possible. So but I don't have anything else. If you guys
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Let's see if I can get 500 people to coordinate.
I'm probably going to owe you a gift certificate to Pietrus or something.
Right.
So if you guys have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. All right, any questions? Okay. Yeah, I think that would be lovely to see if we could align some of those, opportunities to meet and to ensure that we're all on the same page, so to speak. So thank you for that. Under new business, before we begin to close down for the evening, just as a reminder that, years ago when we started creating policy, we felt the best practice would be that we would alternate sort of lead facilitator roles. So the chair, the term for the chair is opposite, or kind of an opposite years as the terms for our vice chair and our secretary. And because, our vice chair and our secretary are technically in place for the next year, technically my term as chair is up as of December. Technically, it would end in January. That being said, if you are interested in serving as chair, please email Kate and Cody. If one of you is interested, I will gladly step aside, so I would not ask for a revote. If no one is interested, I am happy to serve it for the final 2 years that I can. And that leads me to the next piece, which is a lot of us have served since the inception of this board. Some of us served even prior to the inception of the board. Rich, you were a part of a committee that put together a task force that basically brought this inclusivity board to life. Who else was a part of that committee that's still here with us in regard to that?
Donna?
Donna was a part of that process. Thank you. Hi, Donna. I didn't see you, but I see you now. So hello. Yeah. So, but with that, according to city policy, those of us who have started since the inception of the board in 2016, our term will technically be up in 2 years, and we're figuring out when that will be. That by policy, we cannot serve any more terms until we take a pause. And then I believe after that pause, we can come back and wreak havoc once again. Is that correct, Cody and Mayor Pro Tem?
I think you can serve on other boards, so I sure hope that each of you decide that you want to serve on something else, because we will find a place for you.
Okay.
Right.
Well, great. That's good to know.
We looked today.
I think you just muted yourself, Cody.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. We're looking closer to the end of 2025 or 2026. We're just trying to confirm if it's December 31st, 2025 or December 31st, 2026 that your terms will expire, because there was sort of when they did that, it was still a full term before it applied to us. So we still have some years for that, but should be thinking about it. And I've brought this up before, but also to think about the size of this board. We're having a lot of turnover. So, you know, we're still the largest board, and in some ways, sometimes it serves. I mean, we might want to, as we go forward in the next few months, think about that, the size, and what we're accomplishing and those sorts of things. I know those sort of keep getting called into question. So
yeah, we started having conversation, I believe, about that prior to the pandemic, and then it just kind of, we paused because the board had stabilized to some level with membership. But I agree. I think the larger it is, obviously, the more the merrier, right? We're very inclusive, but that being said, there's a higher probability for turnover. So we can talk through that, maybe gather some people that might be interested in figuring out how we can restructure that a little bit, and then seek approval from the council as needed. Okay, great. So, and it does seem like it's far away. That being said, I think as we vision forward, just important to really think that some of us who have been here, you know, for a long time, we won't be able to be here forever. And so those of you that have come on recently, you will be set up to be in a position of being in the dark like I am. Did you see the lights just go out? But being in a position to where you can take leadership, and we can support you through that. So always just kind of strategically thinking forward. Any open updates for the good of the order? Just any subcommittee reports or anything people would like to share before we wrap up? And I'm going to stand up and try to get my lights back on.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who has to play that game with their light.
Okay.
So
Don't
Justin,
hear.
I have my hand up. If that's
Oh,
all right.
Michelle, thank you. Sorry about
It's
that.
not much an update, just that I would like to, and I'll do this when the email comes out, but I would love to add to the agenda for our next meeting to revisit the conversation about local tax on essential products, because there actually has been a toolkit that has been released by a number of organizations that have been working towards eliminating tax on things like incontinence products, period products, diapers, things that are considered medically necessary products that are still prone to being taxed as if they are luxury items. Anyway, but I have uncovered a good deal amount of information more, and if we don't already have a speaker lined up, I would love to see if I could get one of the Aurora City Council persons to come and talk to us about how they did it and how it's been working for them, because they do have quite a lot of detail on that front.
Great. I think that would be excellent. I don't believe we have anyone lined up for the agenda at this time. Is that correct, Cody?
that is correct. Michelle, if you get it to Kate and me, we can make sure it gets on there, and somebody invited in advance. That's
Perfect. Excellent. Okay, cool. Thank you.
And then we can use that as sort of a next step to discuss like what we could do as a board to help support some recommendations maybe moving forward.
Correct. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. Anything else for all of us to know? I did want to let you know that Piper did say that for those of us who are part of the Safe Spaces community subcommittee, we will be spending some time. We'll find some time to meet and finalize things. We've been a little bit in a hold situation while we've tried to all get together, but we definitely need to make some decisions. We have some decisions to make. I know Piper has been leading that front and has some great ideas we'd like to push forward for approval for this board to go into recommendation mode for approval for City Council. So, okay, great. Any final thoughts? Okay, hearing none. It is 7:31. We will consider this meeting adjourned. Thank you so much all for your amazingness, and I hope you have a great rest of your October.